This is the direction of child custody in the United States right now. I could pretend that future best interest of the child is the watchword all over the United States, but I'd be lying. And as a matter of fact, only about half the state, well, not even that many, about 15 states use future best interest of the child as the criteria, the major criteria they use to decide whether the father or the mother is going to get custody. Most of the states in the United States still almost automatically give custody of the children to the mother, and the father has very little recourse. They can sue, but usually in order for the father to gain any custody at all, in select circumstances, they don't get any custody whatsoever. But for them to get any custody at all, they have to prove that the mother is unfit, or that there's something wrong with the mother in order to get custody of the children. Of course, there are lots of problems when the mom and dad decide to no longer live with each other. The first, of course, is the stress of initial separation for the child. Whether it's the mother or the father, the child suddenly only has one parent, whereas before they had at least two. Hopefully, they had two parents. Some cultures in the United States, do not teach men to take care of children. As a matter of fact, the man isn't supposed to take care of the children. In the Victorian times, men did not take care of children. So if you watch an old movie like Meet Me in St. Louis, the father seems like he's kind of a dip. He doesn't have a clue what's going on. Usually he doesn't know what's going on in that movie, and he's just surprised that his daughter's having problems with the fact that they're moving to New York. That's what the whole crux of the story is about, a family moving out of St. Louis during the World's Fair. Starring Judy Garland, and we talked about Judy Garland in the last class. It stars Judy Garland as one of her best movies. There are cultures where men can't wash their own clothes or cook their own damn food, like we're babies. Yeah, exactly. Or Francis can't cook his own breakfast. Chef Francis can't cook his own breakfast. Oh, I don't know what's wrong with him as far as that goes. But there are cultures in the United States that are like that. So the probability of a man being able to take care of children in those cultures is nigh on to impossible. You certainly wouldn't want him taking care of children if he couldn't cook or couldn't clean the toilet. By golly, somebody's got to clean the toilet. Of course, I learned all that stuff in the military. Also learned it at home, of course. Diminished parenting, of course, now there's only one parent, and you will hear people talk about, I have to be both the mother and the father. Always tough, whether it's the male or the female, trying to be both parents, especially if they have a child, if they have children of both genders. That's really, really tough, because maybe they know how to handle boys, but they don't know how to handle girls, or maybe they know how to handle girls, but they don't know how to handle boys. Sometimes the one parent is really upset with the other parent. So if it's a female parent, she doesn't especially like her male children because they remind her of her significant other. And vice versa, I guess it could be the same thing. One of the things my daughter always complained about, she didn't want to turn out like her mother. Her mother's not a very nice person. So she didn't want to turn out like her mother. Her mother wasn't very good at taking care of children. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to take care of children. She was afraid that if she had a child that she'd be just like her mother. She'd want to abandon the child after 2 or 3 years, which is what her mother did. You know, this was a fear that she had. And so she didn't have a kid until she was in her 40s. And the reason she had a kid was because she was dating a guy who had a small daughter. And she was able to take care of that kid, realizing, geez, I really like this. This is a lot of fun. I feel really strong toward this child. So she decided to have a child of her own. And it seems to be working. She's not acting like her mother. I told you about her mother. Her mother got married like 5 times before she finally married a guy with 6 kids. And my ex-wife had to take care of him, as confusing as that is. Okay. So diminished parenting is a problem. I'm not very good with girls, I'll admit it. I raised my little girl as a little boy, pretty much. I couldn't comb her hair. She's got really fine hair. I couldn't comb her hair. You know, I'd have to start dating somebody so they'd come over and comb my daughter's hair. They had to put mayonnaise and peanut butter, oh my God, in her hair. If you can't comb somebody's hair, if you put mayonnaise in their hair, for some reason it takes the tangles out. I could never figure that out. It always seemed kind of gross to me. But and my daughter had really long, really fine hair. The poor thing. I still feel sorry for her. She has a short haircut now, of course. I don't know if I ruined the kid. She seems okay. She's pretty tough. But then again, I raised her as a boy, so yeah, she's pretty tough. When I was raising my kids, soccer was kind of brand new in the United States. Not a lot of people playing soccer. So my daughter used to play against the boys, just like Mia Hamm did. I don't know if you remember Mia Hamm, soccer player, retired about 10 years ago. She married a baseball player. I don't know, Boston baseball player. Anyway, I raised my daughter the same. She used to kick boys' butts. I mean, it was really kind of strange. But I raised her as a boy. Maybe that wasn't correct. So what's another problem? Loss of significant relationships, including extended family. Grandparents, for example, you lose your grandparents potentially. And that's what happened with my grandson. My grandson was living in Florida. His father's parents were living in Florida. They didn't treat him very well because my daughter and the baby daddy were never married. As a matter of fact, he moved out before she gave birth. He was messing around and he moved out. She kicked him out. And so they didn't acknowledge my grandson very much. They didn't pay very much attention to him. They were afraid that they would end up doing a lot of babysitting, which potentially could have happened, but it didn't. So they moved, my daughter and my grandson moved north to Iowa, where my wife takes care of them. And of course I take care of them when I'm home, if I'm ever home. Christmas, I get to be home Christmas. But guess what happens Christmas? He has to go down to Florida. So I don't get to play with my grandson hardly at all. I mean, the only reason you have kids is so you have somebody to play with, right? Is that why you have kids? Why do you have kids? So you have somebody to feed? Come on, let's get real. So you have somebody to play with. Christmas is a lot more fun when you've got kids. You get to buy them presents. You buy them presents that you want to play with. Isn't that the way it works? Let's vote. How many people think you buy Christmas presents so that you can play with the toys? There we go. Okay, that's 3 of us. Okay. Write that down. You buy Christmas presents so that you can actually play with the toys. So sometimes you buy them older Christmas presents than you really need to because it's more fun for you to play with them. I bought my son, I used to like to play with slot cars. They were cars that ran around. Okay, so I used to buy my son a new slot car outfit every Christmas, and I'd play with it the whole time. Of course, he fell asleep, and he didn't know what's going on. Anyway, something for me to play with. You have kids, so you have somebody to play with. That's nice, isn't it? I mean, it's better than ignoring them, isn't it? I'm thinking it's better than ignoring them. Maybe not. Multiple moves, including changing schools and loss of friends. Of course, this is what the complaint was when my grandson was moving north to Iowa. The idea was that he had to change schools. As it turned out, the school that he changed to was a blue ribbon school, much better than the schools in Florida. Florida doesn't even have any blue ribbon schools. That's how bad it is down there. The place is a swamp. I told you that before. Florida is going to go away. It's not going to be there anymore. It's already almost underwater. It's a swamp. Bugs, let me tell you, there's bugs all over the place. Snakes everywhere. Alligators, crocodiles. I don't know if they have crocodiles. They have alligators all over the place. Anyway, but he lost his best friend because his best friend lives in Florida. However, he's such an affable little guy. He has friends everywhere. He has friends at basketball practice. He has friends at football practice. He has friends at soccer practice. I mean, everybody loves the kid. He's just fun. Now here's a problem. This is a real problem. Either parent becoming involved with a new partner, of course, can be a problem. Sometimes the partner is attracted to the woman because of the children. Not because he wants to take care of the children, but because potentially he wants to molest the children. This is a problem. Or she. Well, not so many she's, but a lot of he's. He's have kind of one thing on their mind. It's kind of a tragedy. So boyfriends can be a problem. Stepfathers can be a problem. But also biological fathers can be a problem. So this can be a really serious situation. A new partner. The Uniform Marriage Divorce Act said courts could consider the following: the wishes of the child, of course, very important. The wishes of the child's parents, very important. Are they going to take care of the child? How are they going to take care of the child? Who wants to really take care of the child? What if you have a situation where nobody wants to take care of the kid? Mom doesn't want to take care of the kid. Dad doesn't want to take care of the kid. He doesn't think it's his responsibility. He's not sure that kid's his anyway. I hear that a lot. When I worked in the lab, one of my jobs was drawing paternity tests, which were always a lot of fun. Because he doesn't want to prove that's his kid. He has to pay child support. So getting them to sit down and hold still is kind of a trick. And you have to draw. Well, in the old days, you had to draw a lot of blood. Not so much anymore, but drawing paternity tests is a bit of a trick. A lot of fun. So the wishes of the parents, of course, is very important. The relationships between the child and the parents, siblings, and significant others who interact with the child, that has to be taken into account. The child's adjustment at home, school, and in the community, just getting a divorce. Having two parents there, and then all of a sudden you've only got one parent. Hopefully you've got one parent. Hopefully you've got the parent that cares at home. It's quite an adjustment for the child. The physical and mental health of the parties involved. Of course, if the child leaves, we've got the child's mental health to worry about. We've got the parent's mental health to worry about if the parents have to leave. Most states permit two kinds of custodial arrangements: sole and joint custody. Each with two aspects, a physical aspect and a legal aspect. And the legal aspect has to do with who's paying what. In the case of my daughter and the baby daddy, he didn't want to pay child support. And they made a deal that he wouldn't have to pay child support. So he wasn't paying any child support. My daughter was raising the kid all by herself. And sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't there. From time to time he would buy diapers, which was kind of nice, or he would buy him a new shirt. But if he bought him a new shirt, she had to remember which one was the new shirt that he bought, so that she could put the kid in that shirt to go over to his dad's house. That got to be kind of interesting. And then all of a sudden he started not stealing shirts, but accumulating shirts. So he was taking all this kid's shirt so that he would have something to wear when he came over to his house. So all of a sudden, all the clothes in the house started disappearing. Slowly, one by one, he had like 3 pairs of shorts, and the dad had 15 pairs of shorts. I mean, it was just the most bizarre thing. Underwear became really pull-ups. Oh my God. They used to argue about underwear all the time. Of course, what underwear do you want to wear? I mean, obviously, your Captain America underwear and your Captain America underwear are in the wrong place, right? They're at Dad's house. So he wants to go over to Dad's house across the state in Miami. He wants to go to Dad's house to get his underwear. No, wear your Ninja Turtle underwear. No, I can't wear Ninja Turtle today. Ninja Turtle is green, and I'm wearing red, and I have to wear my Captain America underwear. You understand? Okay. Ninja Turtles. That's Leonardo. No, I need Raphael because I'm wearing blue today. Isn't Raphael the blue? I can't remember. Anyway, physical custody refers to the living arrangement, whereas legal custody concerns a responsibility for decision making. Decision making becomes very, very important. One of the reasons I divorced my first wife was because she was a very strict disciplinarian. So decision making was extremely important in my house. I'm kind of, you might have guessed, I'm a little bit loosey-goosey. I'm not nearly as strict as other people are. Dr. Ami. I'll let you turn in anything anytime you want. Just get her done. That's my theory in life. Her theory in life is you'd better be on time and not 15 seconds late, or by golly, I won't grade that paper. Okay, so decision making, very important in my household. As far as she was concerned, I was very happy when she left because she wanted to spank the children for anything. And of course, I'm not a spanker. I don't spank people, much to my wife's chagrin. In sole custody, the child will live with one parent, although the other may be granted visitation rights, and the same parent will have legal decision-making authority. And this is the way it works in most of the states in the United States. So if you decide to get a divorce from your significant other and you have children, you need to know which state you're living in before you get a divorce. Be careful because
before you get married.
Well, yeah. Marry somebody else. Somebody that you won't have to divorce eventually. So why are there so many divorces in the United States? There's got to be a reason, doesn't there? Are people marrying the wrong person? Is that what's happening? Is the criteria we're using to select somebody who we want to marry, is that skewed in the United States?
Yes.
We want to marry the most exciting person we can possibly. We want excitement. Isn't that what we're after? Well, sometimes excitement turns into stupidity after, 3 weeks or 2 years or 7 years. You're marrying the most exciting person. You should be marrying the most stable person, the least exciting person. My wives made a mistake, and I told you this last time. My wives made a mistake. They married the most boring person that they could find. That was me. And they wanted excitement. They needed excitement. Well, my first 2 wives. My current wife is okay. She thinks I don't know what she thinks of me. But she's 1,500 miles north of here, so maybe that tells you what she thinks of me. But I'll see her during Thanksgiving, I hope. I know she has to go down to Florida. We're going to Florida for Thanksgiving to visit my son. I know she's going to be there because she has to take my grandson down to Florida for Thanksgiving to see his baby dad, his dad. In joint custody, both parents retain parental rights concerning decisions about the child. This is joint legal custody. And the child can alternate living in the parents' homes. This is joint physical custody, or they live in both places at the same time. Usually one parent is designated the residential parent. In the case of my daughter and my grandson, my daughter is the residential parent, and that's what they call them in Florida. She is the residential parent, so that makes my grandson's father, it makes him the holiday dad. So every holiday he has to go down to visit his dad. Now unfortunately, of course, Florida and Iowa are nowhere close to each other. It's like 1,700 miles apart. It takes 2 days to get from one place to the other, unless you get on an airplane. Airplanes, they don't give those flights away. They don't just let you, hook a ride back on the tail. That's not the way it works. They charge you a lot of money to fly from one place to the other. And usually it's not just one flight. Usually you got to jump on a plane in Iowa, and then you fly to Chicago, or you fly to Atlanta, or you fly to Dallas. You fly to a hub, and then you fly down to where you need to go. So it's an all-day affair flying from one place to another. Anyway, so one parent is a residential parent, and the other one has joint custody. Differences between sole and joint custody. Joint custody distributes the frequency of interaction more evenly between the children and each parent. It's a good idea for the child to see both parents as much as possible. Sole custody is not really the best idea in the world. Keeping the child away from that parent is not a good idea. Evidently, children need to feel like they are loved by at least more than one person. That's what they need. Now, unfortunately, when I got my divorce, I was in Texas. My parents were in Indiana. My in-laws were in Indiana. My ex-wife was, who the hell knows where she was. She was somewhere. My ex-wife, what am I talking about? Okay. But I was in Texas, so it was really tough. Not only that, I was in the Air Force. So it was really tough. I didn't have any relatives around. There wasn't anybody to babysit. So you know what I did? That's how I dated, was I found somebody to help me watch the kids.
The world of a man.
I know, I was such a bad man. Usually nurses. Nurses are really friendly people. They really want to help. All of them think that they're mothers, and that's why they're nurses. They're mothering people. So that worked, kind of. I know. I hardly dated anybody. Don't get all excited.
Right.
Like I was, a different woman every night. That's not what happened. I wish that's what happened, but that's not what happened.
But you're not excited, so that's...
I'm not excited. I had problems finding anybody to date until I started playing softball. And I was such a good softball player. Isn't that stupid? I'm the same guy I was before. Because I hit the ball so well, now all of a sudden I'm dateable. That doesn't make any sense. It's like a basketball player. The guy that can hit the three-point shot, all of a sudden he's dateable. He may be the ugliest guy in the whole county, but now all of a sudden he's dateable. Okay, joint custody requires more interactions between the divorced parents and generates more demands for cooperation concerning the children. Joint custody results in more alterations in caregiving arrangements, along with more separations and reunions between children and the parents. Children in joint custody fared better than children in sole custody on a number of measures related to adjustment and interpersonal relations. And they've looked at the statistics, and what they've determined is the more parents you have, if you have two parents, the less likely you are to get in trouble. In single-parent families, the children get in trouble more frequently. Now, why would that be? What's wrong with kids raised by one parent? Whether it's a male or a female, it really doesn't matter. Single-parent families, their children get into more trouble. Now, why in the world would that kid get into trouble?
Attention.
He's looking for attention, exactly. He's seeking attention that he's not getting. And if he's got more than one sibling, if there's more than one kid in the family, then he's not getting as much attention, especially if he's the older child.
Does that include if they have a stepdad or stepmom?
Stepmoms and stepdads don't always count. But we're talking about single parents,
Oh.
single parent homes. And of course, my grandson's in a single parent home. So am I worried about him? Well, a little bit, maybe just about. Both of my kids had problems when they got older. They're good kids, both of them are good kids, but both of them felt abandoned by their mother. They may have been better off if they had gone with their mother and they'd been abandoned by their father. There's, for some reason, there's some psychological reason that mothers have a stronger connection to children than fathers do. So they might have been better off. Both of them had abandonment issues. My son's 46. Yeah, he's 46. My son's 46 years old, and he's never been married. He doesn't trust women. He called me last night on the phone. We talked for an hour. Gee, Christmas, kid, come on. You're 46 years old. Give me a grandchild already, okay? Knock somebody up. What the hell's wrong with you?
Sound like my mom.
He's got a fiance, and they've been engaged for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. My goodness, get her pregnant. Damn it. What's wrong with you? I know. It's so sad. I can't get
Or
a
use that word, the word that you were using yesterday.
What?
No, I'm not gonna say it.
You can't say it either.
No, I don't want to say it. The camera's on.
Oh,
The
jeez.
camera wasn't on yesterday.
The camera wasn't on yesterday. Here, I'm making fun of poor Travis for not saying the word. Okay. That's my son. He's having problems. But he has abandonment issues, and so does my daughter. My daughter used to get drunk and call me up on the telephone and tell me what a horrible father I was. I know, it just broke my heart. I know. Only when she was drunk did she think I was a bad father. Wait a minute. My wife used to do the same thing. She'd tell me what a horrible husband I was when she was drunk. But she'd never say that when she was sober. So was I a good husband until she got drunk? Is that what happened? Nothing changed.
You became boring when she got drunk.
I'm boring all the time, okay?
Okay.
You can take that one to the bank. Children in joint custody fared better than children in, okay, we already talked about that. Fathers benefited from joint custody because they had more frequent contact with their children. The more contact they have, the more attention they'll pay to the children. The more in their lives they will be. We keep seeing these television shows where this guy hasn't seen his kid in 17 years. Now all of a sudden he wants to become the model father and take care of this child, this individual. That doesn't happen. I'm sorry. You need contact with somebody. You lose your desire to be with somebody the longer you're away from it. Which is a hint and a warning if you're in the military and you go on a deployment someplace. About a little over a year is about as far as you can go. All of a sudden you can't remember what they look like anymore. You can't remember what their voice sounds like. My brother was on a deployment to Afghanistan, and he was in charge. So he and his wife were able to communicate like every day, and she wouldn't leave him alone. So he'd go out on a convoy, he'd be taking supplies to somebody, and she would call him while he was on the convoy, and he'd have to carry his laptop with him, and then they would have to communicate. But it was always really dangerous because the enemy could triangulate on that signal and tell where the convoy was. So he was lucky, I guess. He didn't get attacked or they didn't blow him up or anything. Mothers benefited because it afforded them greater opportunity for courtship. My daughter complains that now that she is in Iowa, she can't give the kid away for the weekend to the dad, that now she doesn't have any time to herself. Of course, my wife takes care of the kid from time to time. Anytime the child needs to be taken care of, my wife takes care of him. Anyway. So there's a greater probability that the mother can start dating again. Evidence on the effects of divorce on children. The most significant effects of divorce on children occur in the first year or two. And it all depends on how old the child is. If the child's very, very young, then usually there's no problem. There's less of a problem. The older they are, the closer they are to puberty, the more trouble there is. That's one of the things that we have noticed. If the child's young enough, there may not be any effect at all. I'm sorry? Yeah, it goes right over. Well, they don't remember any of this stuff. My son was 9 months old when my wife left. But the problem wasn't that she left and it bothered him so much. It was the fact that other people asked him where his mother was, and he'd have to tell them that he didn't have a mother, that the mother was gone. And that's why he had abandonment issues. It wasn't because it bothered him so much. It bothered him when people asked about it. And this was in Texas. And in Texas, the law states that the mother gets the children. So nobody could figure out, and they would query him, and they would ask him questions, and they would try to dig and find out what was wrong with me that this woman abandoned her children. Obviously, all women are good mothers. Everybody knows that in Texas. So evidently there was a problem. And that poor kid had to answer these questions over and over and over again. Not just with people on the street, but with teachers. Teachers wanted to know what was going on. No, teachers, they should have known better. Shut up. That's what they should have told him. The women at daycare would ask him all these horrible questions. Dad, the German lady was asking me this question. They should have left him alone. Both the well-being of the primary parent and the level of parenting conflict are major factors influencing outcomes. Children from families in which the parents had a great deal of conflict seem to do better following divorce than do children from low-conflict families. And this was a problem in my house. I don't fight, okay? I don't argue. So if somebody's mad at me, they have to hold it inside, the poor thing. I feel so sorry for my first wife because I wouldn't fight. Remember when she stabbed me? The reason that she stabbed me was because I fell asleep while she was arguing with me. I wasn't arguing back, and I fell asleep, and that's why she stabbed me, because I fell asleep. It's a capital offense to fall asleep when somebody argues with you, evidently. And I was almost murdered for
Were
falling
her
asleep.
parents divorced when she was younger?
I'm sorry?
Were her parents divorced when she was younger?
No. No, her parents stayed together despite the fact they hated each other. They despised each other. And it was obvious. I mean, they would call each other just god-awful names. Cow. He called her the cow. I mean, that's not a very nice thing to call your wife. You heifer, not heifer. That would be a nice thing to say. He called her a cow.
She probably wanted you to call her a cow.
Well, she wanted me to spank her, which was kind of interesting. I found that kind of curious. I'm not a hitter. I'm just not a hitter, okay? She left me for a cowboy that punched her, knocked the holy hell out of her. Just beat her up all the time. If she said something smart to him, he just slapped her across the face, knocked out two of her molars. I know.
And she told you this?
Oh yeah, she told me. Well, she wanted me to fight everybody. She wanted people to beat me up. She wanted me to beat other people up. She wanted to see blood.
Was it Navajo?
I'm positive she's not that. She told me that she was Chickasaw.
There you go.
She's Italian, she's not Chickasaw.
She wants to be with Esteban.
There you go. That's the bond they match.
Around 75% of children whose parents divorce will not experience significant developmental challenges, or long-term negative effects of the divorce. It all depends on when they get the divorce. The older the child is, the more problems they will have, right up to puberty. So if they're 2 or 3 years old, they won't remember anything. They won't have any problems whatsoever. So if two people are going to get a divorce, they need to get a divorce in the first couple of years after the baby is born. That's the best time to do it. If they wait till longer, and this is what used to happen in the old days. I told you that in the 50s and 60s, you couldn't get a divorce. You had to go to Reno to get a divorce. So you couldn't get a divorce in Indiana, Illinois, New York, Mississippi. You couldn't get a divorce in those states. So people had to stay together. So what we saw were a lot of conflictual marriages where the children were being destroyed by the conflict that was going on between mom and dad. So when they first started allowing people to get divorces, it looked pretty damn good. But then again, a lot of these kids were already messed up because they had watched their parents fight for the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 12 years of their lives. So we have a problem. We've had a problem in the United States. People are selecting spouses for the wrong reason. We are just not very good at it. There's something that's going wrong. Half of marriages end in divorce. And like I said, you guys are okay because I took up 2 of those divorces already, so maybe you can actually stay together. We'll see. We'll see. So what is the criteria you use to select a significant other?
Cute butt.
A good 3-point shot? Great butt. That's what I'm looking for. A great butt. Okay. I mean, what criteria? Are we using physical attributes? Are we using psychological attributes? What are we using to select our mates? Are we looking for somebody that's a good parent?
No.
That's the last thing you're looking for. Who cares about whether they can raise babies or not? And sometimes you get stuck with somebody that can't raise children, that is a real jackass, like my first wife. I didn't know she was so mean. I had no idea. I didn't know that she'd want to spank the children for spilling their milk. My goodness gracious.
Oh my God.
I know, it's milk.
Sure she didn't go to boarding school?
She grew up in a conflictual home where mom and dad hated each other. Mom was a cow and dad, what was dad? She was afraid he was seeing prostitutes. Whoremonger, I think, is one of the things she called him. I know, it was terrible. Or the son of a bitch or the bastard, that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of home she grew up in. So she knew conflict, and she'd get hit for no reason whatsoever. I mean, just smacked. And she wanted me to hit her. She loved the cowboy. He used to just wail the tar out of her. Her next husband was a truck driver, and he used to beat the crap out of her too. She ended up she lost 5 teeth.
How's she doing now? Have you seen her?
She's married to a guy. She married a guy with 6 kids.
Thought she didn't like kids.
She didn't, but
How
she
do you know
married.
this? She
Well,
calls you?
the last time I interacted with her was in 1990. She was with this guy.
Facebook.
My daughter is friends with her on Facebook,
Oh, okay.
so I get the message from time to time. Not that I care.
Yeah, I don't even talk to any of my exes. It's like all blocked. Email block, everything's like just blocked.
I don't understand this stuff. The two guys that she did okay with were both Mexican. She married a guy down in Carlsbad, New Mexico, who was a Mexican railroad worker. Nicest guy in the world, just the sweetest guy in the world. Of course, he didn't hit her enough, evidently. So she lost him. She divorced him, and then she hooked up with another guy. And then she ended up with this guy. This guy's only got one arm, and maybe, I don't know if that has something to do with something. He's a mechanic. He's only got one arm. I know. Lost his arm in an automobile accident.
You know, the other day I was actually talking to Jerry, who has a radio station, Jerry Jim, our engineer. And I was just curious because I was like going through stuff on YouTube, and I came across this story about Navajo love story about a grandmother telling a story about her arranged marriage. And I asked him, you know, I was like, Jerry, is it true, you know, do you think arranged marriages last longer than marriages that you choose for yourself? And he said, yep.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you marry for love, and you're passionately in love with somebody, there's only one direction for that love to go. To become less intense, of course. So you're feeling like you're falling out of love with people. But if you get in an arranged marriage, you don't even like that person. You don't even know that person. So the more that you are around this person, maybe you develop some feelings for them. Now all of a sudden, your love is going up instead of down. Yeah. So arranged marriages make sense.
Yeah.
When you take cultural psychology, there's a whole section on arranged marriages, which is fascinating. So there you go.
And it goes towards just the survival of the people.
Right.
You know, which is the main goal. It's
Sure.
not love, it's not passion, it's not selfish. You know,
Right.
it's actually for everyone's benefit that
Right.
these two people come together, not just for the benefit of those two people.
Makes sense.
Which is, I think, a lot of ways that we are going about things with marriage and finding partners and stuff.
But we don't do that. We're looking for the three-point shooter or the captain of the football team or the lady with the big eyes or whatever.
That's what Bruce looks for.
Whatever. So we're marrying somebody and we have all these expectations, and where do we get these expectations? From music, from movies, from television shows,
Even books.
and books, of course. We're getting all this information, and it's mistaken information. We should be looking for somebody that will help us raise our children. By golly, that sounds like a good idea. What makes it less likely that divorce will be adversely adversely affect the children involved? The custodial parent is competent and well-adjusted. The person that they're around the most is a solid, mentally healthy person. But what happens if we give it to the mom every time? Wait a minute. If we give it to mom every time, what happens? What's a possibility? Well, remember, right after that mother had the baby, she got depressed. She had the baby blues, or she had postpartum depression. Hopefully she didn't have postpartum psychosis. So potentially we're dealing with somebody who has a proclivity for depression. What's another problem that women have more than men? Anxiety. Women have anxiety more than men do. Okay, so what do we have this tough lady that is happy all the time? Well, the probability of having a tough lady that's happy all the time is not as high as finding a guy that is fairly even-keeled. So well-adjusted is the question. Can this individual take care of a family all by themselves? Totally different than if there are two parents. Who's going to take the little girl to ballet practice? You know, wait a minute, I have to work until 5 o'clock. Ballet practice is at 5:30. Can I drive all the way across town to pick up the kid and go to ballet practice? And then get the boy to soccer practice by 5:45. So that's, you know,
Still make it work.
If there were two people, then potentially one could take the boy to soccer practice, the other could take the little girl to ballet
There
practice.
is two people, a lot of times that doesn't work out.
So they need two vehicles.
Yeah.
There you go, you need two cars.
Yeah.
Or 4 cars, I don't know. Let the little girl drive herself to ballet practice. Parent has regular and consistent contact and takes an active interest in the activities and school performance of the child. This is particularly important. They need to show that kid that they're important. So they need to do all this extraneous stuff, all this extra stuff. This is important. They need to go to the kids' ball games. They need to watch the ballet recital. They need to do this stuff just to show that kid that they're important. One of the things that happened with my daughter was that she was in ballet. She was also in gymnastics, she played soccer, but she was in ballet. And my current wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, but my girlfriend, would always go to all of her recitals because she was a dancer and she loved to watch dancing. And it was so important to my daughter to not only have me there, but also to have somebody who actually understood ballet and didn't talk like a truck driver. And didn't walk around saying, don't cry, only little girls cry, that kind of stuff. It's somebody that would actually let her be a girl, which was different. I mean, it was completely different. It's not my fault. Well, maybe it is my fault. I didn't know how to let her be a girl. I didn't know what girls were like. My 2 sisters were nuts. So I didn't want her turning out to be nuts like my 2 sisters. My goodness gracious. So I don't know. I wasn't very good at letting her be a little girl. She was better, but then again, my mother was a tough lady. She was she took care of the family during the Depression. So she milked the cows and she's the one that went out and got all the eggs out of the brooder house, and she's the one that did all the work. So my mother was tough. She was mean. She's the one that plowed the field and disked the field so that they could plant their grain. That was my mother. My mother was only 4'8". Meanest lady in the whole wide world. I know, she made everybody tough. So she made me tough. And so I thought I would raise my daughter that way. Are you writing all this down, Chris? So I thought I was raising my daughter tough. I was just raising her like a little boy. The parents are cooperative, or at least keep the child from exposure to inter-parental conflicts. Also particularly important. This is really kind of interesting, and this doesn't have anything to do with any of this stuff, but my daughter was teaching school down in Florida. I raised Roxy, and of course she was in the military and we moved around a bunch, but I raised her in Nebraska. And I don't know if you've ever been to Nebraska. They're kind of tough people there. They actually have a winter there where it gets cold and it stays cold, and people have to cut wood and stay warm and stuff like that. The guys are kind of rough and tough. So here I raised my daughter in Nebraska. She gets older. She goes down to Florida and she says, "Dad, all the men are like girls down there. They're such sissies." I'm going, okay, why don't you come back to the Midwest and find somebody that talks like a guy instead of, one of those metrosexual guys.
Oh,
I know. And she complained about the guy that is her baby daddy. Not her baby daddy, but the guy that impregnated her. She complained that he was such a sissy. Dad, he's not tough at all. I can beat him up. She's only 4'8". This guy's 6'4". I can beat him up, Dad. Okay, good. That's a good thing. Anyway, so she didn't like she said there's nobody to date down here. All these guys are kind of sissies.
That is true.
Well, a lot of them come from the East Coast. And
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, and she still can't find anybody to date, but she's in Iowa now. Maybe the guys are a little tougher in Iowa than they were in Florida, certainly in Florida. What are we doing? Parents have to be cooperative. The custodial parent has extended family support, and of course, that is very important. The kid needs somebody else to fall back on, not just mom, not just or dad, whichever the case may be, but they need an extended family. And that was part of the problem with being in the Air Force. I was way down in Lubbock, Texas. And I don't know if you've ever been to Lubbock, Texas. You can't get out of Lubbock. You have to drive out of Lubbock. And it's like 200 miles before you get to a town that you can fly an airplane out of. Except, of course, they have an airport in Lubbock, but it costs you an arm and a leg to fly out of there. But we had to drive 226 miles just to get to Wichita Falls. That's like half a day's drive, going 55 miles an hour. Anyway, I know it was bad.
You drove 65.
Not in Texas, not in 1971. Jimmy Carter, no, they had lowered the speed limit to 55 miles all over the United States. 55 everywhere. Even on the interstates. Well, sometimes they were 60. Anyway, so you need extended family support, and that's one of the things I didn't have in Lubbock, Texas. There are 3 approaches to appointing evaluators. We're talking about assessment and custody disputes. The judge can appoint one clinician to conduct a custody evaluation that is available to all parties. That's the judge makes this decision. Each side can retain its own expert to conduct independent evaluations. And guess what the expert decides? If dad hired the guy, then he decides that dad's the best person to take care of the child. If mom hired the individual, then mom turns out to be the person that is the best to take care of the child. Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. You remember those two individuals, Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston died of an overdose, I don't know, about 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know, it was a while back. They had a kid. Whitney Houston had just piles and piles of money. And the reason is because she made all these records, and all these records were gold records, and of course, her voice was all over the place, and she was making money hand over fist. Bobby Brown was a member of a group, and then he became a single, and he wasn't a very successful singer, but he was married to Whitney Houston. Eventually they got a divorce. They had a kid, so that she's got this pile of money. Bobby Brown's got a smaller pile of money. So the question came up when they got a divorce, who was going to be in charge of this child? Now, Whitney Houston had a drug problem. Nobody knew it because her voice was so good. But she had a drug problem. So should they put her in, should she have custody of the child? And Bobby Brown had a drug problem as well, but his wasn't as severe as Whitney's was. Okay, so what they did, the judge, initially what happened, they both had evaluators, and the one that they hired, of course, they said that whoever hired them was the best, should be the one to take care of the child. Now this is really kind of interesting because it had to do with money. It had to do with a lot of money. It had to do with millions and millions of dollars. So we've got 2 families fighting over a kid. We have Whitney's family and we have Bobby Brown's family fighting over this child. And everything was kind of up in the air until Whitney died. By that time, of course, the child was older. So the question came up, who gets the money? That was the question. Who gets the money? And it was a huge question. Because it not only had to do with whether this child would be taken care of, but it also had to do with money. And so this was massive. This was a gigantic problem. Now the question was, initially, who's going to take care of the child? Bobby Brown had just been to rehab, and he was clean. Well, Whitney, of course, wasn't clean, and she was a very notorious drug user, and she would go on binges. So who did they give the child? Who did they give custody to? Whitney or Bobby? I mean, it's logical that they give it to Bobby, the custody to Bobby, because he's clean. And Whitney's not. That's not what happened. They gave the child to Whitney. Now Whitney had some interesting problems, and one of her problems was that she thought the drugs were okay, and they didn't hurt people. So she allowed her child to use drugs, and her child became a drug addict, a really serious drug addict. So what's more important, the kid or the money? Nonsense. It's always the money. In this case, it was the money. So this kid is a drug addict at 12, and she's got all kinds of interesting problems. Now, what happened to Whitney Houston's daughter? She did. She was, yeah, and part of it had to do with the fact that she was using drugs. She's no longer alive. She may have committed suicide, we're not exactly sure. She died in exactly the same way that Whitney died. In the bathtub, she drowned. She drowned in the bathtub because she was using drugs at like 22 or 23. Died exactly the same way Whitney did. Now here's a case where this was a custody battle, and it was being played all over Hollywood and all over the newspapers. Everybody was picking this up. CNN cared, Fox News cared. Why in the world did all these people care? Well, nobody cared about the kid. They were worried about the money. Everybody was worried about the money. And I don't know, I think Bobby's got the money now, or maybe Whitney's family has the money now. Yeah. But it was a really ugly situation. And Whitney, of course, couldn't take care of a child because she's a raving lunatic drug addict. And she thought that it was okay. I mean, she died with so many different drugs in her system. One of them was marijuana. Wait a minute, marijuana, that just makes you mellow. Well, it did. Put her to sleep, and she fell asleep in the bathtub and she drowned. But she also had cocaine in her system. She also had heroin in her system. It was a mess. Anyway, so these things can really turn ugly. But that's, of course, a special case. But the same kind of thing is happening with a regular two people. Who's the best parent? Who is the best parent for the child? That's always the question. So the judge can appoint an evaluator. Each side can get their own evaluator, or the sides can agree to share the expenses of hiring an expert to conduct an evaluation. And this is what happened in my daughter's case. So they got together. The judge said, we're going to appoint an evaluator. You have to pay for the evaluator. Each of you have to pay for the evaluator. In the beginning, of course, both of them were willing to pay for the evaluator. We knew that we were going to have to pay for it. It didn't really make any difference as far as we were concerned. But when my daughter won the case, the baby daddy decided he wouldn't pay because he didn't win. And if he didn't win, he wouldn't have to pay. Sounds like Donald Trump, doesn't it? I have to win everything, and if I don't win, then I'm not going to play. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's what happened. Most clinicians prefer the first or the third option. The first option, of course, is for the judge to appoint the evaluator. The second is for both sides to pay for the evaluator. Eventually, of course, he had to pay because the judge told him he had to pay. But the judge had to tell him he had to pay. Most custody evaluations include the following components: clinical history, social history, and mental status, interviews of the parents and the children. Standardized testing of the parents and the children. Observation of interactions between each parent and children, especially if they're minors, if they're small children. If we have a parent, some parents can't change diapers. As stupid as that sounds, they can't change, or they won't change diapers. My wife hated to change dirty diapers, so she'd wait until I got home before. And then it would be, oh, what a mess. My God, this baby's had 2 bowel movements and it's urinated 3 times and the diaper is dripping off the baby's body. My God, why didn't you take, I didn't know it was, I didn't smell anything. I didn't smell anything. I think my ex-wife had anosmia, where you can't smell things. Anyway, she couldn't smell things. I got to change the baby's diaper. Lucky me. scrape that stuff off of there. Ugh. Has that ever happened to you? There was so much there that you had to like scrape it off?
You
Never?
change it right when she has a bowel movement.
Yeah, but I mean, it gets squished, especially if it's loose. No? Ah, okay. Maybe I fed my baby the wrong food. Or maybe my ex-wife was feeding.
Probably.
Okay, that was probably it. Assessments or interviews with people who have observed the family, documents or records that might be relevant to the case. A lot of this none of this has anything to do with money, but money gets involved, especially if one side has a lot of money and the other side has very little money. Frequency of different kinds of custodial arrangements. Joint legal custody about just under half, 42.8%. Sole custody with visitation, 30.4%. Joint physical custody, 21.7%. Joint physical custody usually has to do with both sides get an even amount of time with the child, which is kind of a bad deal because the kid doesn't know which house they live in. Kids need to feel stable. They need to feel like they've got a home. They need to know these things. So when I go home, I'm going to go to my room, and my room looks like this, and I've got my bed is over here. The pillow, I can only sleep on this, my Ninja Turtle pillow is shaped like a turtle shell. That's my favorite pillow. They need to know all that stuff. Sole custody without visitation only happens in 4.6% of the cases. So in most cases in the United States, both husband and wife have custody of the child, and they get to interact with all their children. Assessment in custody disputes. Many judges require divorcing couples to attempt to settle issues of custody, visitation, and support through mediation. If it has to go through the courts, it starts costing more and more money. The more people that get involved, the more money it costs. We started out, we borrowed, did you borrow money? We had $10,000 in the bank. And we started out with that $10,000. Eventually it got all the way up to $30,000. I know. Because he wouldn't agree, or he wanted this, or he wanted that. So, and every time that happened, we had to go to a lawyer. We said, he doesn't want to do this. They'd have to go to court. They'd have to talk to the judge. And now all of a sudden we had to pay the lawyer more and more money. Now, as it turned out, I mean, he could have nickeled and dimed us to death, and he tried to. I mean, we started out with $10,000. Eventually it cost $30,000. But he had all the money that in the world, because both his mother and his father were rich. So he had all the money in the world. I make, you know how much I make. And I work here, damn it. I don't make hardly any money. I don't make that much money. However, last year, the third psychology professor quit right at the beginning of the year. I don't know if you remember that. I taught 9 classes in fall of 2017. I taught 9 classes. Well, I'm only supposed to teach 5 classes, so those 4 classes were extra money for me. Okay. But the school still saved money, because if they'd had to pay his full salary, they would have paid him more money than they paid me to teach those 4 classes. But remember that $30,000? I got a $20,000 overload pay, and that covered the other $20,000. So we're okay. We're in good shape now. We're all right. Otherwise, we'd be, I know, SOL. Of course, my wife doesn't work. If mediation fails, the couple can return to court and have the judge decide the issues. And every time that happens, you can't just go to court. You have to take your lawyer with you. Your lawyer charges you for anything and everything. Preparing for court, you have to pay him for that. Going to court, you have to pay him for that. And then the settlement, you have to pay him for that. The benefits of custody mediation are that resolutions are reached more quickly and with better compliance. And of course, that's what happened with my daughter and her former boyfriend. The state must protect children from parents who do not provide adequate food, shelter, and supervision, or who abuse them physically or psychologically. So that's one of the things that we are using these mediators to try to evaluate the home dynamic to determine if the dynamic is healthy or not. A clinician might recommend temporary foster care, and the parents receive training in parenting skills, or in extreme cases might seek to terminate parental rights, which should have happened with Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. They didn't force her to go to rehab, which is what should have happened. But, of course, they couldn't, see, these are all legal questions. They couldn't give the child to Bobby Brown because then he may never give the child back. Whitney might not have gotten that child back. So the family sued the judge to keep the child in Whitney's custody, despite the fact that she was not able to take care of the child. That's what should have happened. So they were thinking more of the money than they were of the child. And eventually, of course, Whitney had custody of the child. Whitney was still a drug user. It was not a healthy home life, except, of course, she could afford to hire nannies and whatnot. Didn't turn out well for anybody, as it turned out. Bobby Brown's the only one that's still alive. The daughter's dead, and Whitney's dead. Both of them drug overdoses. Extreme cases, but at the same time, if we've got a guy from out on the street who has a child and his significant other, the two of them have a child together and they're both drug addicts, what happens next? Well, hopefully Child Protective Services takes the child away and puts him in foster care. How long does it take them to get that child out of foster care? Forever. Exactly. Arlene's in the back of the room going, that is correct. Yeah. They have to prove that they're clean, and they have to prove that they're clean for an extended length of time. Isn't that the way it works? Yeah. Arlene used to work with these in that area. It's the way it works. So if you lose custody of your child, it may take you 6 months, a year. You may never get that child out of foster care, unfortunately. That's just the way it works. But maybe the kid's better off. Maybe Whitney Houston's daughter would have been better off if they put her in foster care. If you can imagine them putting Whitney Houston's child in foster care. All 50 states and District of Columbia have civil commitment laws that authorize the custody and restraint of persons who, as a result of mental illness, are a danger to themselves or others, or who are so gravely disabled that they cannot care for themselves. We're not talking about custody. We're not talking about that type of custody anymore. We're talking about civil commitment. Okay. So you're a homeless person on the street in Albuquerque, and they want to take you off the street and potentially keep you from hurting somebody else or hurting yourself. So this is the civil commitment case. A civil commitment case. Beginning around 1970, commitment proceedings began to be reformed, resulting in more legal rights for the mentally ill to resist compulsory commitment. So once upon a time, if a judge thought that you were acting a little goofy, he could put you in a mental hospital without any question, and nobody fought it. And if you watch old television shows or old movies, sometimes it has to do with this civil commitment. They needed to change their laws, and this happened in the 1970s. They needed to change their laws because a judge could just pull you off the street and throw you in a mental hospital without anybody questioning it. And there was nobody that could do anything about it. In 1975, the Supreme Court held that mental illness and a need for treatment were insufficient justifications for involuntarily committing mentally ill persons who were not dangerous. So danger became the watchword as to whether you could commit somebody to a mental hospital. Similar limits on involuntary hospitalizations have been upheld by the Supreme Court in the 1990s. And this was done with Fuchsia versus Louisiana in 1992. Now we think that all the states in the Union are about the same, but the reality is we've got a section of the United States that a lot of really nasty things happen to African Americans. What happened last week? Oh, in Chicago. A security guard, a guy came into a bar with a gun, and the security guard grabbed him and took the gun away from him. Saved everybody, well, who knows how many people he saved. The cops came in, and guess what happened next? They shot the security guard, killed him. He was a hero. He had just saved all those people's lives, potentially. I mean, it looked like it was going to be the same situation as what happened in the place in California, where the guy killed 12 people, right outside of Thousand Palms.
Oh,
Yeah. Killed 12 people, wounded 17. Could have been the same situation. Security guard saved all those people's lives. Police came in and shot him dead. Not the bad guy, they shot the good guy. Why did they shoot the good guy? Not at that point. The gun was secure. He didn't have a gun. Why did they shoot him? Sharon knows. Why did they shoot him? Why do you just shoot somebody? Well, why did he look so dangerous? He was a security guard. He had a vest on that said security. The people in the bar were yelling, "He's the security guard!" And the police pulled out their guns and shot him. Why? What was wrong with this guy?
because he was African.
No, you're right. He was African
Well,
American.
he was, wasn't he? He was?
He was black.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the guy that he took the gun away from was white. So who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Well, as far as they were concerned, because they looked at the world through racist eyes, the bad guy's always the black guy and the good guy's always the white guy. Even though all these cases around the United States, the bad guy's always the white guy. Isn't it? I mean, like always, not just sometimes. It's like every damn time it's a white guy with a gun. And sometimes it's a white guy with an AR-15. My goodness gracious. But the black guy saved all those people's lives, and they came in and shot him because he was black, and the guy that he had just secured the gun from was white. As sad as that is. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, you've got to remember that the South has a long history of treating black people very poorly. And it's not that different today than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So we always need to think about that. The amazing thing about today is that the guy that's running for governor in Florida is black. I know, it's a southern state and they may have a black governor. It's better than that. The lady that's running for governor in Georgia is black. The first black female governor in the United States. Of course, both of them are behind in the election. It was a week ago. I know they should have counted all the votes by this time, but voter suppression, they're trying to decide what's going to happen next. Anyway, this is something that we need to remember, something that we need to think about. So if you were going to take somebody off the street in Alabama, guess what race they would be? Yeah, white. No, they'd be black. Of course they'd be black. Because black people are more dangerous than white people. Everybody knows that, especially the policeman that shot the black security cop who just saved all those people's lives from the white guy with a gun. I know. We have this prejudice in the United States. And it's something that we need to think about. It's something that we need to deal with. Are black people really that much more dangerous than everybody else? Than anybody that's not black? Are black people the most dangerous people in Phoenix? No, probably it's the old white guy. My God, it's me. I'm the most dangerous person in Phoenix. I have to fly out of the Phoenix airport. I have to go to Phoenix. I'll try to not take my AR-15 down there and shoot the place up. Sharon's scared I'm going to take my AR-15. I don't have one. I'm good. I don't have one. Okay. How many AR-15s are there in the United States? These are military weapons.
Do you
How many
think-
civilians have a military weapon?
Do you think that they should only have that for military use only?
Do I think that Kiana needs an AR-15?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah,
Do you think someone needs it?
Just kidding.
Well, as long as Travis has one too, no, maybe not. No, I think military weapons are military weapons.
Yeah.
And military rounds are military rounds. They're anti-personnel rounds. There's only one reason. You're not going to shoot a deer with a military rifle. You blow the meat up all to pieces. You'll destroy the meat. You can't. It doesn't work. There's only one reason to have a military weapon, and that's to kill people with. So I don't think that, no, I don't believe in that. I think that we need to look into that. But the question is, how many of these AR-15s are out on the street? The answer is 11 million. 11 million. Now the problem with taking AR-15s away from people is that the people that make the AR-15, Bushmaster, makes a lot of money. And what's more important, people or money? Every damn time. You betcha, it's every time.
Me and my husband almost got a gun just for protection. And we really looked at each other like, no, we might shoot each other.
It's more likely that you will shoot each other
Yeah.
than that you'll shoot somebody that's breaking into your place. But I'm not that scared of people. I'm sorry. I know. Should I be afraid of Navajos?
No, I think you've been tortured enough. Just tell any Navajo that you have.
I feel safer here than when I go home around all those white people, I'll tell you
They have
what.
empathy for you.
Okay. The standard for commitment changed from mental illness and in need of treatment to mental illness that was associated with dangerousness or a grave lack of ability to care for yourself. So there has to be a danger, and the danger either has to be to you or it has to be to somebody else. So the question is, well, so what happened over the weekend? No, what happened yesterday? Yesterday there was a guy in Albuquerque that didn't get a raise, so he took his gun to his job and he shot 3 people. I know. And we watched this happening because it was right in the middle of a television show I was watching. Oh, Bull. It was on at the same time as Bull. And so this, be careful if you live in the western portion of Albuquerque. There's a man with a gun. He's just shot 3 people, and we've tried to capture him, but he's still on the loose. He's armed and dangerous. He's already shot 3 people.
There's like a murder-suicide that happened
Yeah.
Another one? Was this in Albuquerque?
right past Gallup,
Yeah. Grants.
somewhere that way.
The room and Navajo.
Was it 2 days ago?
Yeah. It was about 2 days ago.
Was it another white guy shooting
And then Navajo.
Navajo?
Yeah.
This guy was white. Eventually, he escaped from the cops and drove out in the middle of the desert and shot himself. I know. But he shot 3 people before it happened,
Just because he didn't get a raise?
just because he didn't get a raise.
Because of money?
Yeah, I'm glad he had a gun because he had mental problems. So he needed a gun, just in case somebody didn't give him a raise. He could shoot all the people in his place. But he had a mental problem. The problem we have is that we don't have any logical gun laws. We'll let everybody have guns. In the last Congress, the Republicans tried to pass a law that the mentally ill could have weapons. They could have guns. It's always been a disqualifier if you had a mental illness that you couldn't have a gun, but they tried to pass a law that you could have a gun. They want everybody to have a gun. I don't know if that's logical or not. Why don't we stop right here before I start crying?